Hello folks and welcome to this week's That's Mental Mate with me, Brad. I'm joined today by Richard Murr, local dairyman, founder of Children in Crossfire, author, podcast, motivational speaker, musician. Is there anything you don't do?
Work.
So we start every podcast, Richard, by asking every guest how they are.
Well, very good, feeling good. Last week I was away and walked a leg of the Camino in Spain, from Santiago out to Finisterre, which is about 100 kilometres. So I done that last week. So feeling bruised from the walking, but good otherwise.
Lovely. Nice to get out of Derry with the weather.
Oh, it is. Well, it rained a fair bit out there, but it was, as I say, it was warm rain.
Yeah. That's what we get in the summer.
You're right.
So for those of you that are listening that might not know you, I know you're a celebrity in Derry.
Well, but call worse.
So do you want to tell them a wee bit about your growing up? You grew up in Craigan.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm 62 years of age now, right? So I was born in 1961, and I lived most of up there was in my 20s in the Craigan estate in Craigan. So I still consider Mullen Gardens up there my home, even though my mammy moved the house when I lived with her, and then I got married and moved out myself. I suppose the significant part about my story is when I was 10 years of age in 1972, just about 3 months after Bloody Sunday, on the 4th of May 1972, I was racing home from school. I went to Rosemount Primary School, which was just up there in the edge of the Craigan estate, and there was a British Army lookout post at the bottom of the school playground, and as I ran across the school playground, a British soldier fired a rubber bullet. It hit me in the bridge of the nose, and I lost my right eye and was permanently blinded on my left eye. So I'm blind now about will be 51 years or something like that now. So but that I suppose that incident, I often say that, you know, when I was knocked over by the rubber bullet, I was knocked on a journey, and I'm still on that journey. And for me, the significant thing about my story, I suppose, is not so much being shot and blinded or the incident itself. It's what happened from the moment I was shot and blinded. And I think that's more important than, I suppose, the whys and wherefores of the rubber bullet being fired.
To talk about that time, obviously it seems a million years ago now. I was born in 92.
Oh.
So I was coming into the peace process. I wasn't quite there, but
yeah, you were pretty close to it.
Side, it was I was quite sheltered and didn't know the difference between Protestants and Catholics until I went to the big school and came home asking what's this, and they said it doesn't matter. I can't even imagine what it would have been like growing up around those times. If Derry girls has a lot to
go by.
I had a lot to go by, especially English people. Like, I went to university in England, and people just weren't aware of the trouble. They probably heard it and just thought it was, the troubles doesn't sound that bad, it's just a bit of trouble. But when they seen Derry girls and seen soldiers just out on the streets and stopping buses and searching, was that just the norm?
You know, it was bizarre in a way. I mean, I can remember seeing the men out of our street driving around in hijacked dumper trucks, wee small dumper trucks, were filling them with bottles and stones to take down to a point where there was a riot somewhere down near the bottom of the new road, or down the Bogside, or somewhere like that, or down at the BSR as we called it, which was on the new road just to the edge of the Craigan there, sloping down from the Craigan down to the bog. And, you know, I can remember watching IRA men patrolling our streets, masked men with rifles, walking down the street, or staging checkpoints. I can remember standing looking in the car window, chatting to a couple of guys in the backseat of the car, and beside them they had rifles. And it was as normal as talking on the window to a guy with a football kit on holding a football. It was as normal as that. and it felt normal. Like, I can remember going down to the bottom of a street called Broadway, and there was a barricade down there, and I remember climbing up on the barricade and looking over a wall, and the wall went sloped down a hill and bent round, so the back of the wall, you were looking down towards the back of the wall, and there was a hole punched out in the wall, and I remember an IRA man pointing his gun out through that hole, so he had his back to us, and he was able to see an army lookout post from that vantage point. And I was very safe, because we were bent away from any sort of direction the army would have returned fire. But I could see that IRA men opening fire at an army lookout post. And like, that was, you were looking at it as a kid going, wow, that's amazing. Look, do you see the IRA men open? And then you're jumping down, running up and telling your friends all up the street, the IRA open fire down there. And then you eventually see the British Army coming in, and their army, they're Saracens, ferrets, wee ferret vehicles, and the jeeps, soldiers and visors, helmets with visors in front of them, carrying shields sometimes. And looking at that, I see all that from a distance, and it was amazing to watch as a child, but I never really felt the danger. Barricades at the end of each street. The pavement stuck up outside your front door and broken up and used to build barricades. Hijacked cars, hijacked buses, hijacked lorries put across the road and set on fire. It was all normal after a while. And you didn't run away from it, you ran towards it. If you saw a vehicle on fire, you ran down to have a look. If you heard of a riot happening somewhere, you would run down. Now, I would never have ran into the middle of a riot, but you would have ran somewhere to get a better view of it. And there was loads of people doing the same thing. I remember my mammy, she used to shop in Wellworths, which was down in the city centre. We had no car or anything, so she'd walk down the town, go into Wellworths and do her shopping, and come out of Wellworths with her plastic bags full of groceries. And there used to be riots going on down there at the bottom of William Street, which is just opposite where Wellworths was. And the rioters would stop to let my mammy cross the road. Like, that's it. Nobody had any fear, to my knowledge, and it was just normal. People just accepted it. Looking back on it now, it was a very, very unusual environment, and I'm sure it did affect many people. And I didn't, nervous wise and all that. I was too young. I was 10, but I'm sure parents must have been worried sick about their children. Their young adults, their sons and their daughters going out at night to wherever, if it was going to a dance club or going out with their friends and hanging around. I'm sure they must have worried sick about it. But to me, I felt safe. I didn't feel it was in any danger. It's crazy to say that, but that is true. But then Bloody Sunday happened, and I think Bloody Sunday was a changing point for me as a person. And I was still only young, but it was a changing point, because I remember going down the Bogside after the shoot. I wasn't at the march or anything, but I remember going down with my brother after the next day and seeing the blood on the pavements, the pools of blood on the pavement. And it was really shocking. It wasn't like seeing a burnt out car anymore. It wasn't like, watching a riot from a distance. You were seeing blood on the ground, and lots of it. And then I remember going to Craigan Chapel and seeing 13 coffins on the altar. Never saw that in my life, obviously. People died in the Craigan. It used to be the thing in those days. The coffin stayed in the chapel overnight for one night. So you would have seen that all right. But to go on and see 13 coffins, it was just mind-blowing. And I think everything changed from that point on. And the troubles felt serious.
And was there, you said that you feel like that was the turning point? Would you and your friends have thought maybe we shouldn't be going to these things, or do you think you just were a bit more cautious, or you were a bit more like, oh, maybe this isn't the fun and games that we think it is? Or
I never had a conversation with anybody about it. I was too young, but I remember feeling afraid. I remember feeling that something terrible had happened. And then, of course, my Uncle Jared was shot dead on Bloody Sunday. So I remember going to the house and my mammy crying. and different members of my family comforting her. I remember going to my Aunt Ida's house during the week. She was the wife of my Uncle Jared, and seeing her literally crying out of her and how distraught she was. And like all those snippets and combined bits of information that a 10-year-old boy takes in, the blood, the coffins, the tears, the fear in our house, even that night when my mommy watched the door to see who was all coming home, because like she had 9 boys in the house. I was the second youngest, so there were 7 brothers older than me and 3 sisters older than me, and they were all out. You see that fear. What settled in me was some kind of sobering up fear. It's almost in a wee way you kind of grew up suddenly. I just remember it not being the thing that it was, and that never returned to me. That sort of innocent excitement of the troubles.
Do you think that's what it was? Do you think it was just innocence, or?
Oh, definitely. Innocent excitement. 10-year-old boy, 9-year-old boy, running around the Craigan, watching all the activities of the riots and all that. It seemed like fun, nearly. It seemed like fun. It was almost like recreational. Now, I'm sure there was a serious element to it for those that were involved in all that, but I can't say that I was like that. It was just almost recreational, going up to play on top of the barricades, playing football beside the barricades, as I say, watching the talk, or hearing the talk about the riots down the bog, or the riots down at the Rosebank police station, or riots down at the BSR, and all of that, seeing the smoke bellowing up into the sky and trying to figure out where all that was. Now you're in this situation, and I do, when I look back on it, I think it was the changing point for me. I didn't know it. I didn't know what I was. I didn't analyse my feelings at that time. I just know that there was a fear that descended.
I suppose you could argue now, in this generation, they have it with video games and the likes of Call of Duty or anything like that. They have that kind of element to it, but with you it was completely first hand. You're a father now. Would you, whenever you had your children, could you imagine them being in similar situations?
When I had no, I couldn't. I couldn't. I don't think I could cope with it. And when I had my children, I remember thinking, how do my mommy and daddy cope? Like, I worry about my daughters if they're driving to a concert in Dublin. I worry about them if they decide to go on a holiday. If they, like, there's things that I would still say in our house, like if they're going to Belfast for the day, I would say, why did you take the train? Now, I don't do it because of safety reasons. I don't tell them it's for safety reasons. I say, you enjoy the train journey better, and go up on the train and at least you can relax and sleep or read a book or whatever. I paint it that way, but inside I'm thinking I would prefer they do that than drive the car and be at risk of an accident. Now, how did my mommy and them cope, and my daddy cope, when our boys were heading out the door at 7 o'clock at night, wherever they were going, and there was a potential gun battle, there was riots, there were bombs going off, there were people being shot dead? How did they cope with that? I don't know how they cope with it. My nerves would have been shattered if I'd have been them. So that's for them. Maybe that excitement that I would have felt at the start didn't even happen for my mommy and daddy, maybe, or other adults. Maybe they thought, well, maybe the worries were there at the start. I don't know, but I think that it'd be fair to say that a lot of people in those days had a lot of mental health issues, that some people would connect to the conflict that was going outside their doors and all the challenges that came with it. And that's not taking into account the raids in the houses. You've been woke up out of your sleep with the bin lids going, and maybe the army busting on doors and all that going on your street and all that sort of stuff. Like, that's bound to have an effect on people.
I think it was Jamie Lee O'Donnell from Derry Girls I've done a documentary recently about the mental health crisis in Derry, and I think she said a lot of issues are because of the troubles and the likes of PTSD or stress, that kind of thing. It's been leaked down from generation to generation, and they just haven't been able to cope with it. And just the conflicts obviously has a lot to answer for, I think. Even for people that might think that nothing bad targeted them, but there was obviously, have you heard about this, or did you hear about so and so up the road this happened, and do you think that is true, that a lot of mental health is problems in Derry especially, and maybe Northern Ireland as a whole, is due to the likes of the troubles and PTSD, that kind of thing?
I believe that, because if you think about it, families have had to deal with a lot of things, unresolved issues. Like just this week, for example, the young boy Higgerty that was shot dead, I think in the 70s, the soldier passed away this week. That the family was trying to, the soldier had shot him, the family was obviously looking to take him to court and seek justice, and the soldier passed away. And I watched the interviews on television last night. It was young Daniel Higgerty's family, and I watched the interviews on television last night. It would have broke your heart. That family now will never get justice. They probably gave a commitment to young Daniel that they would get justice for him. They probably really were, looking for justice for themselves and their family and all that sort of stuff. And now that opportunity's gone. And how can that not impact on that family and maybe generations of that family? How can it not, Bloody Sunday, not impact on generations of families? How can bombing incidents that killed people, whether it be Enniskillen or whether it be the Dropping Well bombing or whether it be Claudy or whatever it might be, how can those incidents not impact on families, this sense of injustice, this sense of wrong, not impact on those families? That's why in some ways I'm glad I'm the way I am. I've dealt with blindness. I forgive the soldier. I have no anger towards him. And I'm lucky to be like that. And for anybody listening to this podcast here that doesn't feel like me, that's okay. It's understandable that you're angry. It's understandable that you can't forgive. But when I talk about forgiveness, I put it out there in the hope that it helps somebody move on. But it doesn't mean you're a lesser person. But because I have managed to do that, I don't think my children are carrying the baggage of my incident. But maybe if they were alive when I was shot or blinded or killed, then they have to take it on for justice for their daddy. And that's what a lot of families are doing here, justice for their loved one. And that has a big impact on them and their families. And then I remember interviewing a policeman who witnessed the bombing at the Buncrana checkpoint and had to go pick up the body parts, and then at some point afterwards was sent to Oma after the Oma bomb to pick up the body parts. How can that not affect you and the people around you? And some people park it and move on, some people hide it and move on, some people just can't. My family had to deal with me and the impact it had on them, and other families have to deal with it from right across the political spectrum. So it's no surprising that you have a generation today that's still dealing with the stress of the conflict.
And how did, going back to the few days after, so obviously you were running around and you got hit by a rubber bullet, were you knocked out, or do you remember being taken to the hospital? Do you remember how did those few days go for you whenever you come to realise that you were going to be blinded for the rest of your life?
I was seriously injured. I was 10 feet away. Rubber bullet hit me in the bridge of the nose. I was rushed to hospital basically. My fist was completely busted open, my eyeballs were out of their sockets. They thought I was going to die from the injuries. Then they thought I might have brain damage. And then finally, obviously, it was determined I would be blind for the rest of my life. For me, I didn't know for the first month that I was blind. I thought it was the bandages on my eyes were preventing me from seeing. It just shows you how naive I am, really. Because, alright, I thought the bandages were stopping me from seeing, but they used to take the bandages off every day to treat my eyes and stuff, or treat my face. Put drops in and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't register with me at that point that I wasn't able to see. But that's a child, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You know, you don't make those connections.
And did they know then that you were never going to be able to see?
My mum and daddy knew before I left the hospital I was going to be blind for the rest of my life. But, and so all the family knew. And then it was a month after I was shot, my brother Noel took me for a walk up and down our back garden and he said to me, do you know what has happened? And I told him I knew I was shot, and he said, you know what damage was done? And I says no, and that's when he told me that I'd be blind for the rest of my life. And to be honest, I just accepted it there and then. You know, it didn't really have any impact on me until I went to bed that night. And when I was in bed on my own, I remember crying just about blindness, you know. But I suppose I was crying about the fact that I was never going to see my mommy and dad again. And it broke my heart about that. Like, I cried myself to sleep that night. That was it, really. The rest of my life after that was just managing a new life as a blind person and grappling with all that comes with that, you know what I mean?
It's so easy for you to say now, 50 years later, you said I accepted it there and then, but for a 10-year-old to accept that, it must have been very hard. Did you have any animosity or anger or anything like that?
No, I never had any anger towards the army or towards the soldier or anything. Never remember feeling that. I struggled with blindness and I had to learn a new way to live. And, you know, I would have felt more like not being able to play football with my mates. You know, I would have felt that more. I would have felt, you know, are they going out without me in the night because I needed them to call for me and go out to hang around together. And, you know, maybe having a blind boy out with me wasn't anchored them down a bit or whatever. So I would have felt things like that. And that doesn't happen too often, to be honest. But, you know, so there's a wee bit of that creeping into it, but not anger. It was more dealing with the impact of blindness itself and what it meant for me. I just got up and got on with it. You know, I remember walking around Mullen Gardens without a white sticker or anything out there, you know, and going down to Colby Maid's house and all that. Now, I'm sure for some onlooker out the window it would have looked reasonably sad, because I would have went down the street by feeling the fences, following the fences down. I knew by the feel of the different fences what house I was at, because I could see them at one time. And I knew the different texture of the fences, or different style of a fence, or no fence at all maybe. So I knew where I was, kinda. And people would have been, I'm sure, watching that from a distance. My mum and daddy certainly were. And I'm sure it was difficult. So it was a lot of sadness, a lot of tears. Not my part, and my mommy and daddy's part. You know, my mommy broke her heart when I lost my sight. I was blinded, literally broke her heart. I think my mommy had a mental breakdown, to be honest. Although that was never diagnosed, but there were stories about my mommy walking down the middle of William Street in Derry talking to herself. She contemplated taking me and me and my younger brother Kevin down and jumping in the river. She just felt that lost and lonely. She used to sit for an hour or two in the Craig Chapel, just, you know, asking, talking to God and trying to get support and trying to understand what happened. You know, I remember at night listening to her, you know, she would have thought I was sleeping. I was in my bed. She'd be up kneeling beside my bed and she'd be praying to God, and she'd be just crying constantly and asking God to give me back my eyesight. So my mommy was broken in many ways, and my daddy was too. He had his own challenges. He was trying to help my mommy and trying to keep the lid on the rest of the boys, and also trying to deal with his own sense of hurt. and sense of hopelessness, that, his young 10-year-old son was blinded. What was he going to do, And my daddy was one of the most practical men you'd ever meet in your life. And his view when the boys were all growing up is they have to get a trade. Back in those days, it was a trade. Now it's an education. But back in those days, it was a trade. Didn't matter, you had to work for nothing as long as you got your trade, because once you got your trade, you had your skill, you had your degree in a sense, and you were able to take that trade anywhere and get a job. So some of my brothers were electricians, some of my brothers were shirt cutters, some of my brothers were butchers, plumbers, and then there was me. I wasn't going to fit into any of that. And my daddy would have worried about that. He would have worried about what's Richard going to be, how's he going to fend for himself, what sort of life's he going to have. He'd have took all that on board, I have no doubt about it. And I know it because I spoke to my family members anyway, that, again, I was 10, I was in the eye of the storm, but my brothers who were 17, 18, 19, 20, they were all dealing with my mommy and daddy. And my sisters were all dealing with my mommy and daddy, and dealing with the whole predicament that they were in. It was all there, Brad, and it was very difficult for them. I remember there was talk about my education, for example. And you see, my daddy was the type of person that listened to the advice of people that he felt knew better. The local priest or the teachers, the doctor. He always thought, these are educated people, they know what they're talking about. My dad listened to advice, really valued good and solid advice. That was the type of man he was. I remember him struggling about my education, because all the advice he was getting was Richard needs to go to a school for the blind. And that meant me moving out of the house and going to live in Belfast, Jordanstown, where the school for the blind was, and spend 5 days a week or 4 days a week, nights a week, living up there. And my daddy knew that I didn't want to do that. I had a fear of that. I remember them talking about it. I remember the principal of the school for the blind coming down to visit my school in Rosemount, and me petrified meeting them, because I thought they were going to send me away. And my daddy just couldn't do it, and he struggled with it. I remember going up to, they took me to a visit up to Jordanstown School, and they let me go around the school with other young fellas. I thought that was me. I thought I wasn't going home that day. And I went obviously back, and my mommy and daddy were going up in the car, and I remember my mommy saying to my daddy was Liam, and my mommy was Florrie, right? And I remember my mommy saying to my daddy, Liam, I don't think I could send Richard down there. And my daddy agreed with her, and I was so relieved to hear it. You see, back in those days, it wasn't the norm to send a blind person, a disabled person, to a normal school. The norm was you had to go to a school specialised like Jordanstown for me. He went and he spoke to the principal of Rosemount and the principal of St. Joseph's so that they would take me in. And then he went and spoke to a teacher up at St. Mary's School, Mary Donnelly, who was a Craigan woman, a young teacher at the time, to ask her would she teach me to type. And then he went and spoke to another teacher, Kevin McKillian, to ask him would he be willing to give me extra tuition. My daddy done all of that. One day, and this is the story I'm getting to, one day he was walking down through the Craigan and somebody stopped him and says to him, Mr. Moore, you've been very selfish. Richard should be away at a school for the blind, and you're only denying Richard, what he needs. And my daddy took that bad, because he always listened to advice, and he knew the advice he was getting to send me away. His head was telling him, send Richard away to a school for the blind, but his heart was telling him he couldn't do it. And he stuck with his heart, thank God. Many years later, when I was 16, and back, what I done in those days was CSEs. I didn't do GCEs, we done CSEs in our school. And so it was equivalent to, say, doing your O-levels or whatever. And I only done 5 exams, and I got 5 grade 1s. The Derry Journal decided to write a story. Maybe our school contacted them or something. I don't know how they knew, but so the headline in the paper was "Rubber Bullet Victim Does Well." And I was lying in my bed, and as teenagers do, you lie on half the day, you're lying in your bed at 12 o'clock a day or 11 o'clock or whatever, and my daddy comes up and wakes me up. And he says, "You're in the front page of that journal today." And I try to be all cool and all teenager, and aye, what does it say anyway, sort of thing. And I was dying to hear it, but they let me daddy know I was dying to hear it. And he read out what they wrote in the paper, all the, how I've done so well educationally and that sort of thing. And I wrote my own book in 2005 when I was 30 odd years of age, or whatever age it was. And it was 40, I don't know what age it was. Well, anyway, 2005, let's see, that would have made me what, 72, probably made me 42 or something. But anyway, I done the book, and when you're researching a book, Brad, you kind of, there's a lot of my story I didn't know. I was in the eye of the storm, didn't know what was going on in our house, didn't know half of it, I was only 10. So I was talking to my brother, and my brother says, "Do you remember my daddy reading you the stuff in the Dairy Journal about you doing so well?" And I says, God, I remember it well. He says, "My daddy was delighted because he made the right decision for you."
Not just proves that any reservations he had, you proved him wrong, proved not him wrong, proved other people wrong.
Well, it wasn't even about proving them wrong, it was more about
knowing he done it for you.
He was obviously always worried that he allowed his heart to rule his head, and that he make a decision that was detrimental to me. And he was all proud that it was the right decision.
And do you mind me asking, you said before about how the troubles affected everyone else as well as the victim. Did you find it weird for you to accept it at such a young age and see these other people, like your mum and your dad, struggling with what happened to you, whenever you just learned to accept it? You said you went to bed that night and you cried yourself to sleep, and then you just knew you have to get on with it, but knowing that these other people were struggling was not so strange for you, because you were kind of thinking, this has happened to me, but it's obviously a ripple effect, if you know what I mean.
I suppose I got glimpses of the suffering at that age. I was protected a lot from it. I learnt a lot of it afterwards. Like, I remember my mummy up crying beside my bed, as I told you, but that would have been few and far between. I didn't see much of that. So in many ways I was protected from it. The family protected me and rallied round me, and also had to manage my mummy in the middle of it all, and then my daddy, but he was a powerhouse in many ways. He was dealing with his own emotions, but at the same time he stepped up, didn't he? And my mummy stepped up too. I'm not in any way taking away from her, but she was just more emotional. Like, at the end of the day, the both of them, I'm sure, comforted each other. And I remember one time my mummy, this again in later life, my mummy saying, she used to sit and talk to me daddy, and she used to say to him, like, we used to talk about the worries he had for me. When my daddy died when I was 17, he died of a heart attack, and he wasn't well for about 2 weeks before he died. And I remember my mummy saying, "Liam, I don't know how I'm going to cope without you. How am I going to manage with Richard?" So they were a great, support for each other. Obviously, when he did die, my mummy felt that, God gave her a big challenge. I don't think I'd be that big a challenge, but there you are. And they faced it. They faced it. My mummy loved it. She was 95. She only died in 2015. My daddy died in 1978. My mummy faced her brother being shot dead, Bloody Sunday. 3 months later, her son being blinded. And people often talk to me about forgiveness, and me not being, and we were talking about earlier about me not having any anger. The reason why is because they never displayed any anger. My mum and daddy never displayed any anger. Any notions of forgiveness I have come from them. And I suppose that, in many ways, among other things, taught me the role that we all play in the lives of somebody else. The role that we all play, and the responsibility that I have and you have, and others have, in how we influence others and the messages we give them and the directions that we point them in. And you've got to take responsibility for that. And, I hope that I pointed my children in the right direction, and my mum and daddy certainly pointed me in the right direction around that whole area of lack of anger and forgiveness. And as I say, if you don't have it, it doesn't make you a bad person, but I'm so glad that I have it. Because, you talk about mental health, for example, Brad. I think when you forgive somebody and you experience the fullness of forgiveness, which I have through meeting the soldier, you're a far happier person. You really are. Now, I'm not happy about everything in life. I have the worries like everybody else does. You worry about different things at different stages of your life. There are things that make you happy, there are things that make you sad, there are things that get you down, whatever they might be. But in terms of being blinded, I'm glad I don't have anger or bitterness or hatred, because I'm happier not to be like that. So at least that's something I don't have to deal with, and also something that contributes. When you forgive somebody, there's a contentment within you, and there's a freedom within it. So therefore you're happier, and I'm certainly happy because of it.
So talk us through, you've left school, you've got your GCEs. How did you get into finding children in Crossfire, or was that a while after? Or
I mean, when I went to university after, went to Rosemount Primary School, went to St Joseph's Secondary School, got my exams, went to university, got my degree, got married, 2 children. I was compensated for being shot, so I invested the money, and I bought, with half the money I bought a house, and the other half I bought a pub, and then 2 years later I bought a second pub. So by the time I came out of university, I was the proud owner of 2 pubs and had an office above one of the pubs, and went in, and my job was just managing the pubs. Now, not down pulling the pints or anything, just we wouldn't let me pull your pint or be the bouncer. But I mean, I was up doing the admin, doing the order, and stock control, all the usual stuff. So anyway, up to that point, say I was in my mid-20s, I never thought about blindness. I genuinely didn't. I didn't. I was so blessed with the people around me. I didn't really struggle with blindness at all. And whatever challenges that blindness had, I just ignored them, or didn't let them bother me. It wasn't like I was totally independent or could dander up the town whenever I wanted, or that's my phone talking in the background, is that alright?
Yeah, that's fine.
It wasn't that I could dander up the town when I wanted to, or go out and play a football match or whatever. I couldn't. I relied on people, but I was surrounded with that many people and good people that it never was an issue for me. So I was happy as Larry, and went through university, loved university life, played in bands, loved playing in the bands, had a wee recording studio down the house, loved it. So everything I was doing, I was having a ball. And I think it was in my young adult years that I began to think, why am I so happy? How is it that blindness hasn't brought about this sadness to me or whatever? And I began to look at it. And I suppose I also had simultaneously become very aware of issues affecting children in other parts of the world. I used to do I was never that busy, like managing the pubs, right? So I'm not going to pretend I was working 8 hours a day at it, because I wasn't. I was up in the morning, done my bit, and then I was hanging around the rest of the day. But hanging around with the mid-sizes. But anyway, I used to sort of get involved in charitable causes, and I used to organise itineraries for different groups of people coming to Northern Ireland. They meet politicians, they meet victims and all that stuff. I remember a group of workers from developing countries came, and while they were listening to all our stories, I was listening to theirs, and I was listening to how they were, the work that they'd done throughout the world and stuff, and I really just felt myself being drawn towards children that suffer from poverty. And I remember one time even then thinking, Jesus, I'd rather be blind and live in Northern Ireland than have my eyesight and have to endure some of the suffering that children endure in other parts of the world. I began to develop an empathy for children who weren't as lucky as me. It didn't have the opportunities I had, didn't have the support networks that I had, and children that lived in abject poverty. So I decided I would sell out the business and I would set up Children in Crossfire. And as opposed to the thinking behind it at the time was I wanted to use my story to help others. I felt that I could be a voice for children that couldn't speak for themselves. And I felt I was very lucky to have what I had in life. So as I say, I sold out the pubs and I set up Children in Crossfire. And that's 27 years ago now. I'm still banging the drum or shaking the collection can or whatever you want to put it. So we work in Tanzania and Ethiopia at the minute, and we work with children under 6 years of age, providing access to education and health. That's basically what we do.
Okay. And do you think you resonated with the kids so much because of what happened to you when you were younger, or?
I think it did.
Yeah.
I think it did. I couldn't cope with children suffering. I'll say I couldn't cope with it. It just made me very sad. Children suffering. I think every child at the end of the day deserves a fair crack of the whip. Deserves to have opportunities in life that I had. So I just began to develop an empathy towards children, in particular children that were in developing worlds, or so-called developing world, that children that were living in circumstances that they done nothing to create, but were now having to deal with it. And that's why I called the charity Children in Crossfire. These children may not have had bombs or bullets flying over their heads, but they were still caught in the crossfire of global issues, of global decisions, things that they were no control over, but yet and all was destroying their lives. So that's why, and then of course Children in Crossfire, just to reflect the fact that the charity emerged directly out of the Troubles. I was in the receiving end of so much love and compassion. The reason why I was able to survive blindness, the reason why blindness was an issue for me, the reason why I was able to get on so well in my life was because of the people in my life, my family, my friends, the local community, the teachers, the clergy, everybody that just came in and out of my life and made blindness for me an easy challenge. And when I set up Children in Crossfire, I only ever wanted to give back some of what I received.
Do you feel like you've done that?
I feel like, your job's never done really, but I think a lot has been achieved, but it's not down to me. I played my part in it, a small part in it, but if there's a child receiving education or health today in Tanzania or Ethiopia, it's not because of me. It's not even because of Children in Crossfire. It's because of those people out there that showed me what real love and compassion is. My mommy, my daddy, my brothers, my sisters, and all the people around me. And they give me the example. And that's why I always say, never underestimate the role that you play in the lives of other people. If you punch somebody in the face, it has an impact. If you hug somebody, it has an impact. And some have negative and some have positive. But when I sat in a classroom in school and we all got up for the tea break or the break time, and a mate comes over and sticks his elbow out and says, "Richard, do you want to go out with me?" That was kindness and generosity in a way that they'll never realise it for me. They'll never realise what that meant to me. And my whole life has been surrounded by that. And I just think any child, given that level of support, that level of security, can grow and blossom and contribute positively to their own life and the lives of others. And if that's what's come out of Children in Crossfire, well, to me it's a tribute to all those people, that gave me so much.
Just probably round up now, talking about you meeting Charles, the
soldier.
How did that come about? How did you decide that you wanted to meet him? How did you end up meeting him? How can you tell me through that?
There a point in my life, I don't know when I was 20s, 30s or whatever, I become curious about the soldier. I remember even walking down through the town and doing different things, coming to checkpoints and wondering, was that the boy shot me? Or was it not? What do you think? So I was curious, did he ever notice me? Or was he ever around? I wondered what happened to him. I wondered, did he ever think about me? So that curiosity was there, and it come in and out, you know. And then I had the experience of being interviewed with journalists all over the world, from every network, radio, newspaper, magazine, over the years, you know. I'm not boasting now, don't get me wrong, just saying that's what used to happen. And I remember always saying to them, you know, I would love to meet the soldier sometime.
And was that for your own peace of mind, or do you think?
Well, you know, the motivation evolved, Brad. Initially, I was curious. Loved to know who he was. Loved to know, you know, more about it or whatever. And then, as I got older, I began to think, you know, I think I would like to let him know that I forgive him. You know, I think it might help him or whatever. So your reasons and your motivations evolve. And then the BBC commissioned a documentary made about my story. The documentary was called Blind Vision. And a Belfast company called Hotshot Films at the time, a guy, Brenton Byrne, and they made the documentary. And I told them the same thing that I told every other journalist. I hope to meet the soldier sometime, never thinking that would actually happen. And of course, that was around 2004, 2005, and things began to relax. Soldiers were coming back to Northern Ireland to sort of walk around, to look around and go where they served as soldiers, not safely, and all that sort of stuff. And they began to chat to ex-British soldiers. And because you see, I didn't know anything about the soldier, didn't know anything about him at all, didn't know his name, just knew the regiment. But the regiment, the battery has 80 people in it, so it was one of those 80, but you didn't know who the 80 were. So these guys began to talk to ex-soldiers who were serving in Derry in Northern Ireland, you know, and they began to tell them, they remember the 10-year-old boy being blinded, and someone would give a name of a guy that done it, and then they were able to go to the army headquarters in England, you know, where the regiment was based, and they asked them would they be willing to give the location of the name of the soldier, the location of the soldier. At that point in time they had a loose name, but then they got it confirmed with the military records, and they saw a name, Charles Innes, which was very, very similar to the name that they had. And they had Charles Ince, and the only name in the regiment they came in near was Charles Innes. And they hired a guy, a private detective, to go over and basically hand deliver a letter from me, which he did. He wrote back to me 3 weeks later, and ever since then we've been friends. Oh no, well, I sent him a letter, he sent me a letter 3 weeks later, and then we agreed to meet, and I flew over to Scotland and met him. And that was an amazing experience. You know, to forgive somebody, you know, is one thing, but able to tell them is another. And that's where I feel I experienced the fullness of forgiveness. And it was great. And, you know, I like Charles, and me and him have remained good friends.
It's just crazy that someone could do something to someone nowhere near as life-changing and could go their whole life without speaking to them again. Something so petty or something so immature or juvenile, but something as massive as this, that you're able to not just forgive them but become friendly with them. It's just it's just such an inspiring story.
I can understand why you would say that in a way, but for me it was just a natural progression of events, you know. It wasn't like I made big monumental decisions or anything like that there. Look, going to meet him was challenging. You know, I remember feeling guilty about other victims. I remember feeling I was letting my own community down. here I was going to meet a British soldier after what they done to our own community here. So I felt a bit of that, a fair bit of that. I remember thinking about the Bloody Sunday families and people like that there, the way thinking, God, am I letting that side of the house down? Because there were people out there looking for justice for their loved ones, and the British Army weren't giving it. When the date came that I could go and meet him, I went up to my daddy's grave. I went to meet Charles on a Saturday, and on a Friday morning I went up to my daddy's grave. And I just stood at his grave and said, Daddy, I'm sure you know what I'm doing tomorrow, and I hope you're happy, and just give me any support you can give me. And then in the afternoon I went down to see my mommy down to the house, and I said to her, Mommy, I'm going to meet the soldier tomorrow. And she says, will you be okay? And I says, aye. And I think if she had says at that point, I don't think he should meet him, I couldn't have met him. So I was delighted that I had my mum and daddy's blessing, really. And I remember when I was over there, I said to my mommy, look, I might bring him up to meet you someday. And my mommy says, well, Richard, if you're happy, I'm happy. So that was I don't know if that answered your question you asked me there, but that was the context, the build-up, the leading up to it and all of that, I know some people says to me, I shouldn't have met him unless he said sorry. Well, Charles didn't say sorry for the first 6 years of me knowing him. He certainly didn't say sorry before I met him, and he didn't say sorry for the first 6 years that I knew him. And if you had asked him, was he sorry, he would have said, no, I don't feel I need to apologise, nor was I asked to apologise. But again, I would say there that if I hadn't wanted to meet Charles, if I had made it a condition that he had to say sorry before I met him, then I don't think our meeting would ever took place. I think Charles would have been ready to say sorry at that point in time.
And do you think it's from meeting you for all these years and seeing and hearing your story, and that's made him realise that he was sorry, or?
I just think it's a journey. He was a conditioned soldier. He was a captain when he shot me. He was a retired major, 40 years in the military. You're conditioned in a certain way, and maybe he never had to face what he did. And meeting me, he had to face what he did. But he didn't meet Mr. Angry. He didn't meet somebody who was going to put him through a wall. He met somebody who was prepared to forgive him unconditionally. And, that must be hard to deal with. Eventually, 6 years after I met him, he says to me one night, sitting over in Everglades in Derry here, he says, Richard, I am sorry. And it was lovely when it came. But if I hadn't have met him or hadn't have moved on unless he said he was sorry, then that gave the soldier a key to a chamber in my heart or in my head that only he could unlock.
And did you feel different after he said sorry?
Aye. Not that I felt different. It was nice when it came. I never felt I needed it. But when he said it, it was really nice when it came. And it was really nice because I never asked for it. And one of the lessons in reconciliation, Brad, that I learned from all this, if you want to reconcile with somebody, if you genuinely do want to reconcile, you can't expect the person that you're meeting to be the person that you would like to meet. You've got to allow them to be who they are in their space. You've got to allow for that. You can't meet the person you want to meet because it's not honest. And they have to allow you the same space. And you have to be the person you are. And it's only then, when those two sets of circumstances exist, that dialogue can begin. And then the bridges start to develop between the two different positions. And before you know it, you begin to come closer in terms of your positions and standoffishness and all that stuff. And me and Charles are good friends.
And I know from your own podcast, What About You, the first season, you spoke to victims of the Troubles, and there's a couple of people in it that you spoke to who have met with either soldiers or Republicans that affected their lives, and they did meet them and forgive them. And it's it's good that you used your own status and your own story to bring forward more stories that I would have never heard of if it wasn't for them podcasts, probably.
Aye, and that's and the reason why I do that is because I see the power of the human story. I'm sure you do as well, Brad, and that's why you're doing what you're doing here. And, you know, the human story is very valuable. And I've met some incredible people in my life, and I've just decided I would try and capture them on podcasts because they are amazing. And like, there are people here in this part of the world who've been so badly affected by the troubles, but yet and all, they show so much compassion, forgiveness, and all that. It's mind blowing, and it's fantastic, and it should be heard by more people because it helps you. It helps you be happy. Like I always say a thing about forgiveness, it's not about the other person. Forgiveness is about you. It's about you finding peace in your heart, peace in your mind, happiness. You know, it leads towards happiness. It's not a panacea of everything, but it helps, and it helps enormously, and it helped for me. And to the point where, as I say, I'm quite happy to be friendly with a man that blinded me. I enjoy being happy with him. And, you know, he's not a bad person. He done something bad that day, but he's not a bad person. Sometimes good people do bad things, and you've got to find a way to separate that human being from what they did. Blinding me was wrong. It was unjustifiable. You could not ever justify the blinding of a 10-year-old boy. What Charles did that day was completely wrong. But I can separate that action from him, and I acknowledge that he's a nice fella, and he's a nice person, and that he's a father, he's a grandfather, he's a husband, and he's a human being like all the rest of us. And he's likeable. But always remember, forgiveness isn't about justification. Some people think when you forgive somebody you're justifying it. No, you're not. You're not justifying it at all. You're just saying, I forgive you for the wrong that you did.
I think it was a good few years ago I heard something similar to this where you can talk more about someone you hate more than someone you love. I can't remember, I was just a teenager when I heard it, and I just remember it sticking with me. Because you can't put into words if you love someone, you can't put it into words.
Aye.
But if you hate someone, you can talk about them for hours.
Aye, well, that is true.
And it's just like, I personally think love and hate are very, very similar. Very similar.
Yeah.
For you, especially for something like this, to harbour hatred, it's so much, you're at peace without it, without the hatred. Is that how you feel?
Aye, like if you think about when you're angry, and you think about when you're full of bitterness or hatred, and think about how you feel when you know the emotions or the bodily experiences you're having when you're like that. You know, it affects your stomach, affects your chest, affects your mood, gives you headaches, you know, depending on what it is. Why do that to yourself? Especially when it has absolutely no impact on the person that you're directing it towards, or the person that's the cause of it. If I had been kicking the furniture in the house and punching the walls and shouting F the British Army and F the British soldier, sure, Charles wouldn't have been aware of it. He was getting on with his life. So, what's the point? What is the point? I chose the path that I chose, and it's right for me. Other people choose a different path. They're looking for justice, and they're right to look for justice. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can do all that and still be able to forgive. I believe anyway. And it doesn't take away from the wrongness of what happened to you.
Well, I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I know, like, I was speaking to a few people and they were kind of saying, well, why are you getting him on? But it's not in a bad way, but I was just kind of saying, I think a lot of time mental health focuses on the negatives.
Aye.
And I know I've had some conversations with other people where we've talked a lot about negativity. Not that the whole point of the podcast is to break the stigma and not see it as negativity, but I just think your story is very refreshing. The likes that you can forgive someone that changed your life dramatically, it's very refreshing. I think it could be celebrated, and the fact that you took something traumatic that happened in your life and you've done so much with it and so much success with it. I usually finish the podcasts asking my guests if they're having a hard time or struggling, what they do to help themselves. But I was actually speaking to, is it Ronan downstairs, your colleague? And he actually gave me something really nice. He said, I've worked with Richard for so long and he can still surprise you. And he said, recently you were talking about something to do with mental health, and you said that you've asked for help your whole life and you've never felt ashamed. So someone that is struggling with their own mental health shouldn't feel like that. And he said that even all this time that he's worked with you, you can still surprise him with anecdotes like that.
Well, that's very nice of them to say that. And no, we were having that conversation, and quite often I'd be in schools talking to children as well, and I would say to them all, like, I've asked for help. I've been receiving end of help all my life. And, you know, if I'm going out a walk, if I'm in a strange environment and I have to use the bathroom, I have to ask somebody to take me to the bathroom, show me where the bathroom is. I can go to the toilet myself, like, but I still need them to show me where the bathroom is. You know, I'm picking that because that's the awkward examples that people would think about. So if I was sitting in an airport lounge or sitting in a bus depot down in Foyle Street and you were sitting beside me and I never met you in my life and you happened to be sitting there and I was busting to go to the toilet, I would turn around to you and say, look, excuse me, I hope you don't mind, I'm blind. Would you mind showing me where the bathroom is? When I get on the bus driver has to take me off the bus in Belfast or wherever it is I'm going. So I've been the receiving end of help all my life. And you know what? I loved it. I love it. I love it even more. Because it's a nice thing to see. When somebody helps me, it just shows me the good side of people. And it also helps me connect with people. And I'll tell you something else as well. You know, I think when you offer help, you feel better when you offer help to somebody. So don't be afraid to accept help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to offer help. Because you never know the role that plays in somebody's life. We all want to be happy, don't we? When you do something for somebody else, you feel happy. And like, people sometimes think a bigger car, more money, bigger house. Now, we all need those things as well. We need money and stuff like that. I'm not saying you should be in poverty. But sometimes when you have enough of those things, you're still not happy because you're striving for something else. And you're wondering what will make you happy. And I think when you do, somebody says once, in every act of generosity, there's an element of selfishness. And that selfishness is that you feel good because you've helped somebody. What's wrong with that? The Dalai Lama would say there's good selfish and there's bad selfish. The bad selfish is when you're selfish to the point where you're maybe holding something off somebody or you're being bad to somebody. The good selfish is when you do something good and you feel good yourself. So whether you call in a neighbour that's living on their own, whether you help a blind person off a bus like me, or whatever you do, when you do something like that, you feel better, and that makes you feel happy. That makes you find and feel happy. So happiness isn't hard to get. You don't have far to go to get it when you think about things like that.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for speaking to me today. Anyone negatively affected by this week's episode, there are a number of links in the bio to help. That's all from me. I will see you next week on That's Mental Mate.